It began with a pencil mark in the margin of a mystery novel. Page 204. Light enough to be overlooked, deliberate enough to mean something. Thursday mornings are my rhythm. Before meetings, before sermon notes, before the quiet weight of people trusting me with their stories, I make my way to the Willow Creek Library. It's a habit I've kept for months now, somewhere between discipline and refuge. I return books I've finished, and sometimes a few I haven't, promising myself I'll come back to them. Then I stand there, just a little too long, deciding which new stories I'm ready to carry home. The library sits on the far edge of town, past the walking trails. Even inside, you can hear it, the distant echo of laughter, the rhythm of something light and unburdened. It has a way of slowing a person down, whether they intend it or not. That morning, I placed my books in a careful stack on the counter, exchanging a familiar smile with Mrs. Gable as she began checking them in. She has a way of handling books that feels almost pastoral, gentle, attentive, as though each one matters beyond its cover. While I waited, I let my eyes wander. That's when I noticed it. A single book resting just beside her. Not quite shelved. Not quite processed. Just there. As though it had paused on its way back into the world. I picked it up absent-mindedly, turning it over in my hands. A mystery novel. The kind that leans more on atmosphere than urgency. I opened it somewhere in the middle. Page 204. And there it was. A penciled note, written softly into the margin. Which, of course, made it impossible to ignore. I glanced up at Mrs. Gable, holding the book just slightly between us. She looked at the page, then at me, and smiled in a way that didn't answer anything, but suggested there was something worth discovering. And just like that, what should have been an ordinary Thursday became something else entirely. By the time I reached my study, the sun had shifted, casting long amber bands across the oak desk. Thursday always asks this of me, the turn from the quiet anonymity of the library to the demands of my double life. On the left side of the blotter lay my half-finished sermon notes, a meditation on hidden manna. On the right, my laptop waited, cursor blinking patiently for the week's column. I ignored it. Instead, I placed the mystery novel squarely in the center of the desk, as if it belonged there more than anything else. This room is where my worlds usually reconcile, where sermons take shape and headlines find their voice. A pulpit on one side, a press box on the other. But today, neither claimed my attention. The book did. I flipped it over and slipped out the checkout card. It didn't take long to see the pattern. The names moved in a rhythm too deliberate to be coincidence. Each time the book returned, it traced a quiet path between two places, the mayor's office and Willow Creek Dance Studio. Back and forth. Week after week. Not readers sharing a story, something more like a relay. The penciled note on page 204 had already unsettled me. Once you've found one hidden message, it becomes harder to believe in accidents. I picked up my pen, turning it once between my fingers, but I didn't write. Some ideas need to sit in the dark before they make sense in the light. I set the book aside carefully. Because whatever story was unfolding in this town, it wasn't staying in the margins for long. The desk lamp cast a warm, solitary glow over the open pages of the mystery novel. Outside, the Willow Creek evening was settling into a deep indigo, but inside my study, the air felt charged. I looked at the penciled note on page 204, 3 simple words that felt like a heartbeat, still waiting here. I went to the kitchen to get some water, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound to break the tension. The cool glass steadied my hands for a moment. Then I returned to my desk, the weight of the moment settling back onto my shoulders as I stepped once more into the pool of lamplight. I turned to my laptop. The cursor blinked, a rhythmic pulse in the dim room, waiting for me to bridge the gap between two people who were clearly afraid to speak out loud. I started writing. In this town, secrets usually pull people apart. But this one? This one was a bridge. If this book is a relay, it's time to change the baton. In a town like ours, we learn to say a great deal without ever speaking out loud. Sometimes it looks like kindness. Sometimes it looks like restraint. And sometimes it looks like a pencil mark left on page 204. It's a curious thing, the way a small gesture can carry more weight than a conversation. There is a kind of courage in leaving a mark where it might be seen. But there is another kind, the quieter, rarer kind, in choosing to step out from the margins altogether. Friday night, our town will gather, as we often do, to dance, to laugh, to be seen in all the easy ways. But even in a crowded room, there are still quiet languages being spoken. A familiar page. A remembered line. A story shared without ever being named. Not everything meant to be read was meant to stay hidden. And sometimes, if you're paying close enough attention, you might just find the person who's been reading along with you all this time. Not everything meant to be read was meant to stay hidden. And sometimes, the story only moves forward when someone decides to step out of the margins. The next day, Willow Creek felt like a book that had been left open in the rain. Everything felt slightly heavier, more blurred at the edges. I found myself moving through town not as a neighbor, but as an observer of the quiet spaces between people. I started at the dance studio. The air inside always smells of floor wax and jasmine, a place of discipline and grace. I found Sarah at the front desk. She didn't see me at first. She was staring at a folded copy of the Willow Creek Gazette, her thumb tracing the lines of my column with a rhythmic, nervous energy. Then I saw it, the pencil tucked behind her ear. It was the same soft lead, worn down to a point that had spent months whispering into the margins of mysteries. Later, I stepped into the cool, marble quiet of the mayor's office. Julian was there, the man who keeps the town's gears turning with a silent, steady hand. He was meticulously filing papers, but his usual precision was gone. His gaze kept drifting to the window, toward the walking trails that lead to the creek. On his desk sat a library bookmark, the one from the winter fundraiser. The tassel was frayed, as if it had been pulled and twisted through 100 anxious decisions. It was the same shade of crimson I'd seen peeking out of the book Sarah had hidden earlier today, a silent bridge between the office and the dance floor. Now, all that was left was to see if they were brave enough to finish the race. Friday arrived with a strange kind of anticipation, less like a promise and more like pressure building beneath the surface of a quiet town. By the time I arrived at the town hall, the air was already thick with the scent of cedar boughs and something warm and candlelit. The local band was tuning their fiddles in the great hall, a sharp, hopeful sound that drifted through the tall windows and out into the evening. As a columnist, I had put the words out there. Now I had to watch where they landed. I spotted Julian first. He was moving through the hall the way politicians do, a nod here, a handshake there, but something about him was slightly off rhythm. His eyes kept pulling toward the edges of the room rather than its center. He'd come prepared for his public self. Sarah arrived a few minutes later. She came in through the side entrance, and I watched her pause just inside the doorway, taking the room in slowly. When the crowd shifted and a burst of laughter rose near the band, her hand moved, almost without her realizing it, to her ear, as if to tuck her hair back, only to discover the pencil was still there. She quickly smoothing the strands into place as if nothing had happened. And Julian saw it. Sarah moved across the room, greeting people while holding a glass of wine. Julian tried to talk to her, but old Mr. Henderson blocked his path, launching into a long, animated story about accidentally attending the wrong funeral and staying out of politeness. Julian leaned in with genuine interest, chuckling at the right moments, but his eyes kept scanning the room, darting over heads and between columns, looking for her. But she was gone. He finally excused himself from Mr. Henderson and approached the refreshment table. Shania was busy refilling the crystal punch bowl. Julian asked Shania if she's seen Sarah. Shania told him that Sarah went out to the garden to make a phone call where it was quiet. Julian didn't wait. He turned and headed for the heavy French doors that led to the wedding gardens. I couldn't help myself. I set my own glass down and followed. A pastor should respect the sanctity of a private moment, but the columnist in me, the one who had built this bridge, needed to see if it would hold the weight of the truth. I slipped out into the gardens, a space usually reserved for vows and white lace. The air was cool and sweet, perfumed by the heavy scent of night-blooming jasmine. Julian reached the center of the garden and stopped. Sarah was there by the stone fountain. Julian's voice echoed softly off the stone walls as he brought up page 204. Sarah blinked, caught off guard, saying nothing. Gently, he explained, she always wrote in the margins. Pencil, never pen in every one of the mystery books he loved. A pause settled between them. Then he added that the same pencil had been tucked behind her ear earlier, that's how he knew. For a second, neither of them moved. And then they both burst out laughing. The music from the hall was nothing but a low, distant hum out here, replaced by the intimate sounds of the night, the silver splash of the fountain and the soft rustle of the willow branches swaying in the breeze. Julian held out his hand. Sarah didn't hesitate. She stepped into his space, her hand sliding into his as if it had finally found its home. They moved together in a slow, unscripted dance across the stone path, a private rhythm shared between two people who had spent months learning each other's hearts through graphite and paper. There was no audience, no town gossip, just the heat of his hand at her waist and the steady, grounding weight of her palm against his chest. As the dance slowed to a whisper, Julian stopped. He reached up, his thumb grazing her cheekbone with a tenderness that made the air between them go still. He leaned in, and when his lips met hers, the world of the margins finally fell away. Sarah didn't just lean in, she met him with a quiet, fierce certainty, her fingers tangling into the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer as if to erase every inch of distance that had ever existed between them. It was a kiss that held the weight of 6 months of waiting, a mutual, breathless discovery that some stories are too big to stay hidden on a page. I stood back in the shadows of the trellis, watching the two of them eventually pull back just enough to rest their foreheads together, their breath mingling in the cool night air. In a town like ours, we learn to speak carefully, to leave meaning in glances and gestures rather than words. Sometimes that restraint looks like kindness. Sometimes like silence. And tonight, as I stood among the lights and watched them remain close without needing anything more, it looked like something simpler than either. It looked like love. Quiet, certain, and already understood.